Now we have Stephanie Lewkiewicz with neuroaesthetics and creative arts. And this is about the therapeutic modeling of the therapeutic effect of art, if I get that right.
Yes. Okay, sorry, 1 second, let me share my screen. Okay. Okay, do you guys see my screen in presentation mode? Okay, awesome. Okay, hi everybody. Thank you so much for being here, both in my talk right now and at the conference in general. We're so happy with how well everything is going and how many people have come out. So I first heard about neuroaesthetics in a drama therapy class in college. I was a theater major and also a math major. And something that really stuck with me was that my drama therapy instructor, this was the first time I ever heard about neuroaesthetics. And she said, drama therapy works really, really well. Creative arts therapies in general are very effective, but we have no idea why or how they work. And that really struck me and stayed with me, because I was just thinking, that's so strange, right? That we invest so much in this therapeutic practice and it's so widespread and it's so respected, and yet we have no idea at all how it works. So I thought that was really fascinating. And at the time I was doing undergraduate math research with a computational neuroscientist. And I told him about this exciting new field called neuroaesthetics that I had heard about. And I said, like, this is my dream one day to do this kind of research. And it's so surreal for me to be sitting here and talking to you all about this right now, because it's been over 10 years now. And this is like the first time that I've really revisited that earlier interest and ambition that I had. So to be clear, I am not an expert in this. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist of any kind. I'm trained as a mathematician and I have arts training in theater as well. So I am not an expert and I have a very primitive understanding of this. So I apologize if my understanding of it isn't certainly not perfect yet. So at this point, I'm basically going through the modeling stages, and I'm kind of doing what we do when I usually work with biological systems, and I'm doing what I typically do with a biological system, where I start looking at the literature and learning as much as I can about the mechanics of the system. So that's what I've been doing with these concepts of neuroaesthetics and art therapies. And so I'm going to, try to impart to you today a little bit of what I've learned to convince you that it's really cool. And this talk is also going to be kind of a call to arms to get people potentially involved in this with me. Okay, so let's start out just to introduce the ideas we're going to talk about and have a little bit of fun. Let's do a very classic art exercise. So if you want to participate, open your chat. And I'm going to show you a painting, and I'd like you to just send into the chat the words that you think of off the top of your head when you see this painting. I'm sure some of you will recognize. Take maybe 30 seconds. Okay, awesome. So, right, a castle, horse, storm, characters, raid, waves crashing, couple walking, hills, dynamic. Yes, Kandinsky, exactly, Claudia. You recognize that this is a Kandinsky painting, one of my favorite painters. Russian mountains, Adam and Eve, cold water, nebulae, waves, tomorrow into mountain. Awesome. Okay, so I think Kandinsky is perfect for setting the mood kind of for talking about the model of neuroaesthetics that we have, because I think he really does there's a nice duality in his work. I've always thought of like the use of simple shapes and patterns and colors to communicate very complex things. And so what we're going to talk about today, neuroaesthetics, is really this thing that just happened, what happens in the several hundred milliseconds after you receive some kind of aesthetic stimulus and you are affected by it and analyze it and interpret it. Okay, so just to make sure we're all on the same page, I'm going to go through the definitions of these two things. So what is neuroaesthetics? It is the study of the neurobiological basis of how we perceive, create, and respond to art and other aesthetic stimuli. And what are creative arts therapies? They are clinical therapeutic practices rooted in the creative arts, including music, dance, drama, writing, visual art, anything artistic at all used for a therapeutic purpose. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the origins of aesthetics. So the concept and term aesthetics were first introduced by the German philosopher Baumgarten in the 18th century. And it was really the first acknowledgement of a distinction between like quote unquote logical reasoning and emotional perception. So his idea was that we receive external sensory input to our senses, and the senses receive that info and several mental faculties sort of act on it. And so one of them is the logical faculties. So logical faculties, as you can guess, act on the senses to produce ideas, truths, knowledge, beliefs. And the aesthetic faculties act on them to produce the emotional responses that we have. And so this model, as you can probably imagine, has evolved over the last couple of centuries. And up until the point at which neuroimaging really revolutionized this field in the 90s, the working models looked something in general, this is like an oversimplification, but they looked something like this. So we perceive sensory inputs, and then we first conduct an elementary analysis, right? We see shapes, we see colors, lines, textures, symmetry, right? The simplest components of what we're looking at. And then this feeds into a more sophisticated analysis. So we recognize style. This is where our memories are retrieved. We make associations, we interpret in cultural context, social context, religious context, etc. And then finally, all of this work that our brain is doing results in a judgment or an assessment, right? This art is pretty or ugly. This is good or bad. And then maybe there's some feedback from that final stage back to the earlier stages, right? But this is what the general model looked like for a long time. And the foundational assumptions on which it is based, that all of the sort of variations of this have in common, is that the sensory stimulus is really the only independent variable. So aesthetic appreciation is really just a function of what we're putting in here with nothing else about our physiological state, being taken into account. And then also that this is a very linear ordered process. You basically go through these steps sequentially and there's no variation in that. And at the end, it all culminates in this final product, this judgment, right? It is the end goal and it is the output, and that's where it ends. And moreover, all of this is presumed to be happening in isolation. It was always thought that the brain has a separate mechanism for aesthetic perception that is really unrelated to parts of the brain that control other physiological processes. Okay, so in the last 20 or 30 years, we've made a lot of breakthroughs in neuroimaging technology that have revolutionized how we're able to study perception. And so we can actually directly measure levels and locations of neural activity in vivo during an aesthetic experience with fMRIs and PET imaging, et cetera. So what have we discovered with that? We have discovered that these previous hypotheses about aesthetics, this model that we looked at, are basically completely incorrect. And so what does the new latest model of aesthetics look like? So now we know that aesthetic appreciation is closely tethered to what's called the reward circuit. It's the mechanism in our brain that helps us maintain homeostasis by assigning high value and rewards to the stimuli that are good for us and trying to nudge us towards experiences and things that are good for us. So in total, it's full brain activity involving many neural systems that drive perception, cognition, and affect. And so in particular, there's no set linear sequence of events right? Many brain regions are activating in parallel. They're very interrelated with each other. There's a ton of feedback going on between different processes. And moreover, the judgment that we came at the end, the judgment that came at the end is not the final end product. Especially aesthetic appreciation is actually in turn influencing other physiological processes and functions going on in our body and mind. And so I want to pause at this point to acknowledge that the involvement of the full brain in aesthetic appreciation really makes it an almost universal process, right? So research on aesthetic experiences in individuals with dementia, with Alzheimer's, brain injury, other cognitive impairments show that these individuals can still have meaningful and consistent artistic experiences. Maybe their experiences have changed from what they would have been at a different time or under different circumstances, but they are still able to be moved by art and to create art. And I think that all of us here can really see and appreciate the beauty in that. And if we don't need another reason to love art, but that I think is another really strong one there. And so on to creative arts therapies. So research in this area has also significantly expanded in the last 10 years or so. And as my drama therapy teacher told us many years ago, we know that they work, but we still don't really know how or why. And so to kind of sell cats to everybody, some of the cool therapeutic factors that are very specific to them that you might not get in other forms of therapy are embodiment. They help us forge connections between our mind and body. Concretization, they give us the opportunity to externalize things that are inside of us, to project them onto an art object, to work with that art object, to transform, to heal, and then re-internalize them in a new way. And they give us the opportunity to work through symbols so that we can explore difficult, inaccessible, unconscious material in a way that's maybe a little bit more safe for us. And then some other benefits of creative arts therapies are that this process of artistic skill building tends to promote confidence. The creative thinking involved introduces new perspectives and possibilities. The arts distract us from our pain and our suffering. They provide moments and instances, sources of hope and joy. The opportunity for nonverbal expression can open new channels of communication, especially for those who struggle with verbal expression itself. And imagination-based work enables growth and exploration. Right? So creative arts therapies are really, really cool. Okay, so this is my proposition to you. Let's do math modeling of neuroaesthetics and apply it to cats research. So what I want to do is develop a mechanistic description of neural activity in the brain during aesthetic experiences, formulate differential equations models of levels of activation of neurons in different parts of the brain, etc., and then conduct optimal control analysis of different aesthetic interventions. So where we can use math to figure out how to implement an aesthetic therapy in an optimal way. So in terms of the timing of the implementation, the nature of it, the duration, the environment and circumstances under which it occurs, etc. And so I really feel that this needs to be done and that we are the ones to do it. So I say this because I think both fields could really benefit from math modeling because there's still kind of a black box aspect to both. So despite the huge advances that neuroimaging has brought, it mostly identifies correlations and not causal relationships, right? We see that under these circumstances, there's more activity in this part of the brain than in the other, and then it's in reverse under these other circumstances, right? But it's hard to identify causal relationships with this kind of activity. And as those of us who do math modeling know, this is exactly what applied math modeling is ASAT, right? Taking patchwork mechanistic understanding and data and filling in those gaps there. And then on the cat side, again, just for the same reasons that I articulated before, we know that they work, but we still don't know how or why. And so I really think that we're the people who are equipped to bridge this gap. So something I saw mention of in the literature was the sentiment that on the sort of aesthetics philosophical end, there tends to be some reluctance to opening up the field to scientific inquiry. Okay, I'm almost done, I promise. And so the idea that sort of aesthetic experiences are not logical and applying the scientific process to them somehow degrades them and robs them of their purpose and meaning. And I totally get that. When I have my artist hat on, sometimes I feel the same way. But I think that that's what positions us to facilitate this. So we are artists and scientists. We believe in the sanctity of art and emotional experiences. And so we can really approach this in a way that respects the art side of it. And we can say, we're going to do some cool science with this because we can help a lot of people, but we're still going to respect the integrity of the artistic experience. So if anyone is interested in talking about this more, please feel free to email me anytime. I'd be happy to chat with anyone.